Hello everyone. At 78, Arnold Schwarzenegger has finally opened up about behind-the-scenes memories from the Terminator that he had kept hidden for decades. Not the spotlight, not the moments of triumph, but 5 names, 5 colleagues who often left him swallowing his emotions, finding it hard to call them friends. This isn't a tale of grudges, nor an attempt to stir controversy. It's a late-life confession, a raw fragment of memory from the muscle-bound hero, leaving audiences both surprised and deeply moved as they hear it. Linda Hamilton, the name that made Arnold Schwarzenegger both admire and resent her the most in the Terminator, one memory still lingers for him. During a dialogue scene, he tried to lighten the mood with a small, humorous gesture. Linda immediately stopped, looked him straight in the eye, and said coldly, "Don't ruin my moment." The set fell silent. Arnold forced a smile, but inside he felt stung. The muscle-bound superstar, always the center of attention, had just been publicly checked by his co-star. Arnold later admitted that this very strictness helped make the Terminator a masterpiece. Still, the discomfort remained. He once compared Linda to a merciless mirror, forcing him to confront the flaws in his own acting. And for a man used to being on top, that was not just uncomfortable, it was painful. Yet, the irony was clear. The more he hated Linda, the more he couldn't deny his admiration for her. "She drove me crazy," he confessed. "But that's how I knew I was standing next to greatness." The hate was not born of bitterness, but of a strange mix of envy, challenge, and fear of being outshone. Linda's discipline and intensity pushed Arnold to evolve, to act with psychology and depth, not just muscles and presence. Years later, when both had aged and Hollywood's glitter had dimmed, Arnold could look back with calm. He laughed and called Linda the sweetest nightmare of my acting career. The hate he spoke of was no longer anger, but a kind of admission. She was the name that tested his patience, yet also the name that made him grow. In a private conversation, Arnold once reflected, "Audiences loved Sarah Connor, loved Linda Hamilton, because she gave them truth. I hated that because it made me realize muscles aren't always the answer. But at the same time, I knew I was lucky. Not everyone gets to act alongside a woman like her." Today, when Arnold lists the 5 colleagues he hated most, he never hides Linda Hamilton's name. He says it with a half-smile, an expression tinged with both weariness and affection. Because he knows, some kinds of hate are nothing more than the mask of deep respect. And in Linda's case, that respect became something unshakable, a permanent part of the cinematic legacy Arnold leaves behind. Linda Hamilton, the name forever tied to the image of Sarah Connor, was not just a co-star, but a living icon interwoven with Arnold Schwarzenegger's own career. When people think of the Terminator, they picture the cold, relentless killing machine with the immortal line, "I'll be back." But just as unforgettable is the image of the small yet unyielding woman who dared to stand up against a mechanical monster. That was Linda, the actress who transformed Sarah Connor into a timeless symbol of strength, courage, and human resilience. In the eyes of audiences, Arnold and Linda were destiny-bound partners on screen. The destroyer and the survivor, locked in a tense yet inseparable relationship that became the soul of the film. But in Arnold's memories, that partnership was not always sweet. At 78, looking back, he has openly admitted, Linda Hamilton was one of the colleagues he hated the most. Not out of personal dislike, but because of the unique force she brought to the role, a force that often made him feel overshadowed. Arnold was never a man lacking confidence. From bodybuilding stages to Hollywood, he always carried himself with a commanding presence, seemingly unshakable. Yet Linda Hamilton was a rare exception. Whenever she stepped on set, her presence was like a chilling draft, serious, focused, and allowing no room for frivolity. For Arnold, who was used to winning people over with his strength, charisma, and humor, Linda's intensity felt like an invisible wall that stopped him in his tracks. During the early days of filming The Terminator, 1984, Arnold recalled a habit of Linda's that particularly annoyed him. She almost never smiled behind the scenes. While the rest of the crew cracked jokes and shared laughs to ease the tension, Linda remained stern, sometimes so cold that the atmosphere froze. Arnold, the extroverted one, often felt like he was talking to an ice wall. She made me feel like a clown, while she was the one holding the film together. He once sighed. What frustrated him even more was the way Linda embodied Sarah Connor. For her, this role wasn't just a job, it was a mission. She spent countless hours training, sculpting her body, dieting with strict discipline, and diving deep into the psychology of her character. When the cameras rolled, she became Sarah Connor completely. The result gave audiences an unforgettable heroine. But for Arnold, it sometimes felt like standing next to a storm. Her fierce gaze and unwavering commitment made him feel almost unnecessary. Paul Winfield, the gentlemanly presence that made Arnold Schwarzenegger feel small in The Terminator. And yet, as with Linda Hamilton, that hate was nothing more than a mask for deep admiration. Arnold, no matter how proud, had to concede that Paul gave the Terminator something essential, a layer of intelligence and balance. Without him, the film might have been just another string of action scenes and raw muscle. With Paul, the story carried weight, grounding the audience in human reality against the relentless machine. Years later, when Arnold entered politics, he came to better understand the power Paul embodied. It was the power of a slow, deliberate word, of intellect, of restraint, all qualities Arnold, a man of explosive energy, had to spend years learning. Maybe that's why I hated him, he admitted, because he reminded me that noise doesn't always win. Sometimes it's the silence that people remember. Today, when Arnold names the 5 colleagues who made him the most uncomfortable, Paul Winfield appears on the list. Not with bitterness, but with a wry smile. He understands now that the old resentment was actually a lesson in standing beside someone who leaves you no room to boast, no space to show off, forcing you to look inward instead. For Arnold, Paul Winfield was never an enemy. He was a silent teacher, a refined counterpart who made him slow down, observe, and accept that he wasn't always the center of the universe. And perhaps that is why Arnold still names Paul, not to diminish him, but to acknowledge that discomfort can sometimes be the beginning of growth. Among the cast of The Terminator, Paul Winfield was not the brightest star. He played Police Lieutenant Ed Traxler, a character with limited screen time, yet one who left a powerful impression through his calm demeanor, sharp intellect, and commanding voice. To audiences, Paul was like a steady punctuation mark in the film's tense narrative, a man who embodied law, order, and reason. But for Arnold Schwarzenegger, memories of Paul Winfield were far more complicated. At 78, he has candidly admitted that Paul was one of the colleagues who made him the most uncomfortable, not because of open conflict, but because of a subtle, persistent feeling, the sense of being diminished in the shadow of such refined composure. Arnold had always been a conqueror through sheer force. In bodybuilding, in film, even in politics, he was accustomed to dominating with muscles, confidence, and explosive charisma. Paul Winfield, however, was his complete opposite. He didn't need to raise his voice, flex his power, or demand attention. With just a glance or a carefully measured line, he could command the entire room. That weighty silence was exactly what left Arnold unsettled time and again. Arnold once recalled that their very first script reading gave him the impression of a student facing a professor. Paul sat neatly dressed in a simple suit, his voice deliberate, every word carrying weight. When it was Arnold's turn, he read the Terminator's lines in his blunt, forceful manner, but immediately felt clumsy and unrefined. He made me realize that my simplicity sometimes came across as a lack of depth, Arnold admitted. What bothered Arnold most wasn't Paul's talent, but how effortlessly he used it. On set, Paul never fought for the spotlight. In fact, he appeared so little that a younger actor might have felt slighted. Yet when he did speak, the room seemed to pause. His balance, his poise, his sophistication, All of it made Arnold feel like a literal machine, true to his role, built for action but lacking intellectual depth. Arnold often shared one anecdote. During a scene, he cracked a muscle-bound joke to lighten the mood. The crew laughed out loud, but Paul only offered a faint smile before calmly turning back to his script. No scolding, no pointed look, just silence. And yet, that silence burned. He didn't have to say anything. His attitude alone made me feel like a clown in a serious room, Arnold later reflected. Paul also had a maddeningly subtle habit when exchanging ideas. He would begin with a compliment. "That's interesting, Arnold." But then, almost immediately, he would pose a sharp, thought-provoking question that poked holes in Arnold's confidence. It wasn't criticism, just quiet elegance that forced Arnold to confront gaps in his thinking. "He made me hate myself in those moments," Arnold admitted. "Hate because I saw my own limitations. Hate because I felt clumsy standing next to a man so refined." Michael Biehn, the silent rival who tested Arnold Schwarzenegger's patience in The Terminator, the audience, too, responded in kind. After the film's release, the studio received letters praising not only Arnold but also Michael Biehn. He was the heart of the movie. Without Reese, Sarah would never have become Sarah Connor. Reading those words, Arnold felt both pride in the film's success and the sting of sharing the spotlight. But what lingered most wasn't just the on-screen rivalry, it was Michael's behavior off-set. He never acted arrogant. In fact, he was almost disarmingly humble. At group dinners, Michael often listened more than he spoke, and when someone praised his performance, he simply smiled and said, "I was just doing my job." That humility, Arnold admitted, was maddening, because he knew beneath that modesty was a quiet power no muscles could outshine. He made me ask myself, do audiences really want my muscles, or do they want eyes that can tell a story like his? Arnold reflected. For an action star built on the image of the Iron Man, that was a hard question to face. Over time, though, as his career mellowed, Arnold's resentment softened. He came to see that Michael was the one who gave the Terminator its heart, the perfect foil to his own cold, relentless machine. Without him, I'd just have been a killer robot. Because of him, I became the opposite half of a lasting symbol. In one interview, Arnold smiled as he spoke of Michael Biehn. He was the guy I both hated and owed thanks to. Hated because he took away my sense of being the sole focus. Thankful because he taught me that cinema isn't only about strength, it's about heart. Today, when Arnold includes Michael Biehn in his list of 5 actors I hated most, there is no venom in his voice. Instead, there's complexity, a mix of envy, admiration, and gratitude. Because sometimes, the people who test our patience the most are the ones who push us to grow. And for Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Biehn was exactly that kind of silent rival. If Linda Hamilton was the soul and Paul Winfield the intellect, then Michael Biehn was the heartbeat of the Terminator. He played Kyle Reese, the soldier from the future sent back to protect Sarah Connor. Young, intense, with eyes that burned with urgency, Michael embodied a different kind of hero. Not the towering physique of Arnold, nor the calm sophistication of Paul, but a raw, fiery spirit willing to sacrifice everything. His presence created an unexpected counterbalance, one that, at times, made Arnold, the established muscle star, feel uncomfortably challenged on his own stage. Arnold once admitted, "Michael drove me crazy because he was the kind of hero audiences could easily relate to. I was the killing machine, while he was the man who could feel pain, love, and sacrifice. And sometimes that made me look like the villain." This rivalry was never spoken aloud, but it was there in every small detail. When Arnold entered the set, he brought noise, energy, and the awe of his massive frame. But when Michael walked in, with his rugged appearance and piercing gaze, the atmosphere shifted. Women on the crew often gave him lingering looks, and others quietly admitted, Michael had a grounded, human presence that Arnold simply didn't. Arnold, used to being the center of gravity, began to feel irritated. He didn't need muscles. He didn't need to flex. Just by standing there, he made me feel like another species, Arnold confessed. What stung even more was Michael's approach to acting. He didn't just perform, he lived his character. He walked and talked like a soldier, kept his words short, and even during breaks maintained an almost militant alertness. Arnold recalled catching Michael off to the side, rehearsing fight moves alone, sweat dripping, eyes blazing. No cameras, no audience, just total immersion. He made me feel lazy, and I hated that, Arnold said. One memory in particular stayed with him. In a tense scene, Arnold was meant to charge in while Michael defended Linda. As the cameras rolled, Michael suddenly shouted an unscripted line, his eyes burning straight through Arnold. The moment was so real that Arnold briefly forgot he was the Terminator. When the director yelled, "Cut!" the set erupted in applause. Michael smiled faintly. Arnold forced a grin, swallowing his irritation. I was the star, but in that moment, every eye was on him. He later admitted. Rick Rossovich, the loud laughter that made Arnold Schwarzenegger uneasy on the Terminator. What frustrated Arnold most wasn't malice, it was Rick's sheer innocence. Rick never tried to outshine anyone. He wasn't calculating or arrogant. He just wanted everyone to feel good, to laugh, to forget their stress. But that endless playfulness clashed with Arnold's determination to treat every scene like a battle. To Arnold, discipline was survival. To Rick, joy was the fuel that kept everyone going. Ironically, what once made Arnold angry has since become a fond memory. Now, at 78, he admits that deep down, he needed people like Rick. Without him, the atmosphere would have been suffocating. He annoyed me, but he also reminded me that I was way too tense with myself. That paradox defined their relationship. On one side, the strict, muscle-bound star who wanted control. On the other, the easygoing guy who just wanted everyone to laugh. Their worlds collided in ways both humorous and uncomfortable. And when Arnold included Rick Rossovich on his list of 5 actors I hated most, fans understood it wasn't true hatred. It was a mixture of irritation and gratitude. He made me realize I wasn't always right, Arnold said with a wry smile. Sometimes I needed focus, but sometimes I needed to learn how to relax. Rick, with all his noise and silliness, was the one who taught me that. Today, when Arnold talks about Rick, there's no trace of resentment. Instead, he reminisces with a smile, acknowledging that the noisy laughter that once drove him crazy had, in its own way, helped the Terminator become the classic It Island. Among the cast of the Terminator, Rick Rossovich played Matt, the cheerful boyfriend of Ginger, Sarah Connor's roommate. His screen time was brief, but even in just a few short scenes, he stood out as the good-looking, carefree guy with a playful streak. Off-camera, Rick wasn't much different from his character. He was sociable, friendly, and always ready with a joke. Yet that very personality, so harmless and likable to most, was the reason Arnold Schwarzenegger, the star of the film, often found himself quietly grinding his teeth. Arnold recalled that during production, Rick was like a laughter machine on set. He was constantly cracking jokes, teasing the crew, and turning even the most stressful days into comedy skits. For most of the cast and crew, Rick's antics were a welcome relief from the long, grueling hours. But for Arnold, the constant noise and humor weren't a blessing at all. He turned everything into a joke, and sometimes, when I needed absolute focus, that laughter made me crazy, Arnold admitted. Unlike Linda Hamilton or Michael Biehn, both of whom threw themselves into their roles with total seriousness, Rick had a habit of goofing around even on set. Once, while Arnold was preparing for a tense sequence as the T-800, Rick suddenly started imitating a robot, waddling behind him with bulging eyes. The crew burst into laughter and filming had to stop. Arnold forced a smile, but inside he was irritated. He ruined the energy I needed for the character. I didn't want to be seen as a punchline. Arnold wasn't without a sense of humor himself. He often joked with colleagues to keep spirits high. But for him, humor had boundaries. It had to be in the right place, at the right time. Rick didn't seem to recognize those limits. He spread laughter everywhere, even in moments that required intensity. That overdose of fun clashed directly with Arnold's ironclad discipline. Sometimes I felt like I was a soldier, and he was a hippie with a guitar. We just came from two different worlds, Arnold reflected. One memory stayed with him for decades. During downtime, Rick jokingly nicknamed him Mr. Muscles. The rest of the crew quickly picked it up. To them, it was harmless, fun, even affectionate. But for Arnold, it stung. The nickname reminded him of the early days when critics dismissed him as nothing more than a bodybuilder with no acting chops. Every time I heard it, I thought about those headlines that mocked me, Arnold confessed. Rick, in his innocence, had unknowingly reopened an old wound. Bess Mata, the youthful innocence that left Arnold Schwarzenegger awkward on the set of the Terminator. Yet with age, his perspective softened. At 78, Arnold now admits that Bess's presence was more important than he realized. Her laughter and innocence balanced the oppressive tone of the production. Without her, the film might have been suffocating. She annoyed me, yes, but she also reminded me that audiences don't just want seriousness, they need a spark of light, too. And Bess, in her naive way, provided that. So when Arnold places Bess Mata on his list of 5 actors I hated most, it isn't bitterness audiences hear, but a complicated mix of fondness and regret. He didn't hate her because she was cruel or selfish. He struggled with her because she tested his patience at a time when he was still desperate to prove himself. She made me realize not everyone comes to a set with the same mentality I did, Arnold concluded. For me, it was war. For her, it was an adventure. And maybe that's the beauty of filmmaking. It needs both approaches to truly come alive. When audiences think of The Terminator, 1984, the first faces that come to mind are usually Linda Hamilton or Michael Biehn. But alongside those leading names was a smaller, charming role. Ginger Ventura, Sarah Connor's lively and energetic roommate. That character was played by Bess Mata, a fresh face at the time. In the early 1980 seconds, Mata was known as a fitness instructor and part-time actress. She had a wholesome, athletic beauty and boundless energy, exactly the qualities director James Cameron wanted for Ginger. On screen, she brought a sense of youthfulness and lightness, serving as a contrast to the film's dark, tense atmosphere. Off-screen, however, that same innocence often left Arnold Schwarzenegger ever the perfectionist and disciplinarian, sighing with frustration, Arnold recalled. She was like a new student in class, eager and enthusiastic, but without realizing that this was a serious movie, not a playground. Bess arrived on set with bright eyes, constantly asking questions about how to stand for the camera or what expression to use. To many, this was endearing. But to Arnold, who viewed the set as a battlefield, her wide-eyed eagerness sometimes felt exhausting. One memory he often repeated involved a brief but crucial scene. Bess had to play dead on the bed after Ginger is killed. Cameron demanded she remain absolutely still, no heavy breathing, no twitching. Yet, lacking experience, Bess would giggle or fidget during takes, forcing the crew to reset and costing hours. Arnold, locked into his role as the cold, unstoppable T-800, had to stand silently waiting, his patience stretched thin. I wanted that scene to be flawless, but every little movement felt like wasted effort for everyone, he later admitted. Her friendliness also added to the awkwardness. Bess often treated Arnold like a big brother, asking questions such as, "Did you eat breakfast?" Or, "Do you ever do aerobics?" Even as he stood dressed in black leather, preparing to film a brutal killing scene. To Arnold, these innocent questions felt completely out of place. It was hard to stay in the mindset of a merciless machine when someone was asking me about workout routines, he said with a half-smile. Unlike his complicated tensions with Linda Hamilton or Michael Biehn, Arnold's feelings toward Bess were different. There was no rivalry or resentment. Instead, it was a mix of irritation and sympathy. She seemed like a younger sister, passionate and sincere, but too inexperienced to grasp the unforgiving pace of Hollywood. She came in with a pure heart, but her innocence left me unsure how to respond. I wanted her to grow up faster, to stop slowing the rest of us down, he confessed. What Arnold remembered most was her endless energy. Before takes, she would blast dance music and warm up with aerobics. The crew found it amusing, but Arnold frowned. We were about to shoot a scene where Sarah is being hunted in terror, and there she was, bouncing like she was in a gym class. It felt like two different worlds colliding. Today's story isn't about reopening old grudges, nor is it about deciding who was right or wrong. In his later years, Arnold simply wants to look back with honesty, so audiences can understand that behind the spotlight, every artist carries their own burdens. Thank you for listening until the very end. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment, because sometimes a single word of sharing is enough to warm the memories of an entire lifetime.